This is a webinar about the GrowingMKE project. For those that have been following along, you will be familiar with this content. We heard from many community members that are newer to the project that they would appreciate a quick overview of the project. So that's the intent of the webinars today and tomorrow. This webinar will include a 30-minute presentation followed by time for questions and feedback. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation. Staff will respond after the presentation during the Q&A. Okay, so let's get started. Throughout our lives, our needs for housing change. These are some examples of community members in Milwaukee in search of housing. To start today's session, we're going to launch a mini poll to learn a little bit more about community housing searches.
All right, can you see the poll? Have you or someone you know looked for a new place to live in the last couple of years to buy or rent? And if yes, was it hard to find a place that met your or their needs? And I'll close it once we have about most people have answered. Okay, here's what they've stopped. So I'm going to end the poll. Oh, wait. Okay, just all right, I'll end it here and share the results. So about 88% have said that they or someone they know has been looking for a place to live. 10% no, and 1% I don't know. If yes, was it hard to find a place? 68% said yes, 22% said somewhat, and 10% said no. All right, thank you, everyone.
So over the course of the GrowingMKE project, we've been hearing from the community that we need more housing, and that means housing diversity and the units available. This project, GrowingMKE, is focused on some specific tools to encourage more housing to meet the current needs of our community. And as we consider housing, we're talking about a lot of different types of housing for our current needs, including accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, detached single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, and a variety of scales of multifamily buildings. So what is GrowingMKE? GrowingMKE is a citywide planning process about housing to advance housing choice and equity, fiscal sustainability and economic development, and environmental sustainability and resilience. There are two phases in the project. The first phase is a proposed update to the citywide policy plan, and it includes both policies and actions related to encouraging housing choice. And it also includes recommended updates to the city zoning code. The zoning code is the City of Milwaukee's rules for development. Then in phase 2, we're going to make those updates to the zoning code. Comprehensive planning in Milwaukee consists of a citywide policy plan that covers the entire geographic boundaries of the city. We have 14 different comprehensive area plans, and these plans work together to guide future development by setting a collective vision and roadmap for Milwaukee's future. And these are updated based on changing needs in a community. In GrowingMKE, we're looking at how to support our current evolving housing needs citywide. And we aren't starting from scratch. The existing Milwaukee zoning code and comprehensive plan reflect community support for walkable neighborhoods, mixed-use housing and development, and housing choice. And we're bringing together the city's area plans, community goals, and the mayor's vision for economic prosperity together into one comprehensive planning document focused on housing citywide. Some of these recent planning efforts include the Climate and Equity Plan, the Collective Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, and some of our other recent area plan updates that you may have participated in. And we know that this particular project is just one piece of the puzzle in terms of Milwaukee's housing system and the strategies to address local housing needs. There are many other pieces that the city, community partners, and various entities work on to help create a housing system for all Milwaukeeans. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. So what is zoning and why are we talking about it? Zoning is a written document of rules and a map that shows what zone each piece of land is part of. Each zone has a unique set of rules that guide development in terms of the type of use allowed and the shape of the buildings. All of these rules are adopted by the city's Common Council. For Growing MKE, we're not talking about changing any of the zones on the map. We are talking about updating some of the written rules that go along with each of those zones. Milwaukee's zoning code gets updated over time. Milwaukee's first zoning code was created in 1920 when the city was much smaller in size, and you can see that there on the map. Some of the oldest areas of the city were built before the first zoning code, though, and these areas were built without rules and have some of the greatest diversity in housing types. Over time, we've adopted new zoning codes and made updates. Our current zoning code was adopted in 2002 with map changes across the city. Since then, we have made routine technical updates. Growing MKE was launched in mid-2023 to consider our goals for housing and zoning changes needed to reduce the barriers to creating housing that we want and need now. What does zoning look like for housing right now in Milwaukee? Currently, 40% of parcels that allow housing only allow one housing unit in the city. These are the newer areas of the city that became part of the city of Milwaukee in the 1950s and 60s. Over half of our residentially zoned parcels allow for 2 or more units in the older parts of the city. In the areas in the darkest green in the middle map, zoning allows up to 4 housing units as long as the property is big enough. We are also ahead of a lot of other cities, as we already allow multifamily housing in all of our commercial districts, corridors, and downtown. Another thing to know about development in Milwaukee is that we have by right development, which means any proposal that meets all the requirements within the zoning code can apply for a building permit. If a proposal does not meet the rules within the zoning code, the project goes through an additional review process. Why are we taking this project on now? And why are we looking at both policies in terms of our comprehensive plan and zoning at the same time? Milwaukee has a housing shortage now, and while Milwaukee is not currently a rapidly growing city, housing development has not kept up with the demand based on our changing community needs. Milwaukeeans are struggling to find housing of all types, sizes, and price points in this highly competitive market. Recent statistics show that Milwaukee has the third most competitive rental market for multifamily buildings in the nation. And there are currently 14 people applying for every apartment available, showing that we need more housing for our current population. We also know we need more housing diversity in terms of types and the sizes to meet our current resident needs. This dot chart is a lot to take in, but you'll see Milwaukee in the upper left corner showing that it's had a lot of year-over-year growth in rental prices. And at the same time, there aren't enough rental units being built. If you look at Austin, Texas in the lower right, you'll see that they have not had a lot of year-over-year rental cost growth because they are building a lot more housing. When enough housing supply is being built, there is less competition amongst residents for the available housing, helping stabilize housing costs for residents. We also know that even without efforts to grow the city's population, we're going to need more housing in the next 20 years for projected growth due to climate change. We also have smaller household sizes, which means we need more homes because there's fewer people in each home. So we need to work together to grow our housing supply to meet our needs. Some opportunities include allowing accessory dwelling units. Examples of accessory dwelling units are rear cottages, flats above garages, and converted attics. Allowing these types of units will help provide gentle and incremental growth in our existing neighborhoods. And allowing more types of missing middle housing, the types of housing that fits within a walkable neighborhood, like townhomes, fourplexes, and clustered homes like cottage courts, can allow for more housing options gradually over time. It's a priority to advance equity through our zoning code updates. We've been learning a lot from peer cities in the country, as well as best practices from the American Planning Association. Unfortunately, zoning has been used in the past to further issues with segregation, and it's important to now use zoning code updates as a tool to dismantle these inequities. We also know that density and growth are economic decisions. In 1960, Milwaukee had 150,000 more people living in it. Based on this, we know we can easily accommodate at least 150,000 more people within the city and our existing infrastructure. When there are more people in housing, there are more households splitting the taxes, and this can help relieve some of the tax burden in the community, given the population loss and service cuts that we've experienced over time. Another objective of this project is to streamline the development rules to increase our pool of emerging local developers so that they can create new housing in the neighborhoods that they're familiar with and create the kind of homes that our community members need. GrowingMKE is just one piece, but a very important piece of Milwaukee's housing system puzzle, because zoning code updates will help move forward many of the pieces of this housing puzzle. For instance, zoning code updates are an anti-displacement strategy, allowing us to build more housing to respond to current resident demand. Without additional housing, housing costs and displacement pressures in existing neighborhoods will unfortunately continue to increase. This includes additional housing in higher income neighborhoods where there is significant demand, so that there isn't undue pressure on lower income neighborhoods that can displace existing residents. There are many important programs and initiatives that the city, partners, and other important entities need to continue our collective work on. And some examples of these priorities include increasing and preserving Black and Latino home ownership in the city, and creating and preserving rental housing. And with that, I'm going to pass things to Amy.
Thank you, Tanya. Great. Advance. All right. So the GrowingMKE planning process has been a collaborative process led by the City of Milwaukee Department of City Development, with support from a national consultant team of placemakers and DPC co-design to analyze our current zoning code. We also had some support from Walnut Way to extend our engagement to meet people where they are earlier on in the process. Additionally, there was a community advisory committee of 19 residents from across the city, a technical advisory committee of developers, architects, and housing advocates, and an internal team from multiple city departments. We are now in a fourth round of the process for additional engagement. We're a large city, and there are a lot of people that might be interested in this project. We launched the process in the summer of 2023, talking with people about the goals for housing in Milwaukee. Then there was outreach around draft recommendations for the plan in the late fall and winter of 2023. In the spring of 2024, we presented it and had community engagement activities around the full draft plan. There was an initial public hearing for an updated proposed draft plan in July, and we heard from that round of engagement that community members would like to have more time to look at the plan, to understand it, to address concerns, and provide feedback. So now we're in an additional round of engagement, and this webinar is part of that. After this period of engagement, we'll take the feedback gathered and identify potential updates to the plan. Another updated plan will be posted for review before an adoption process that will include 2 public hearings. There's been a significant amount of engagement that has informed this plan to date, so thank you to those that have already engaged and offered your feedback to help us get to this point, and please continue to help us let people know about the project. So what we've heard overall, throughout the planning process so far, we've heard that people are excited about the idea of growth. They want more affordability, they want great neighborhoods, quality of life. They're excited about the ideas around housing diversity and having a more variety of housing types within neighborhoods. They want to see great building design, sustainability, resilience, and connected transportation systems. We took all of the feedback we received to date and wrapped it up into 5 overarching goals that relate to citywide goals: housing choice and equity, economic development, walkable and connected, sustainable and resilient, and healthy and thriving. All of the policies within the plan and the zoning recommendations work towards trying to reach these goals. The policies within the plan are broken into 4 different sections. The policies weave together policies within the housing and neighborhoods chapter of the existing citywide policy plan, the collective affordable housing strategic plan, the anti-displacement plan, along with many conversations and policies around housing and other planning efforts over the last 10 years. The Growing MKE plan will be a chapter in the citywide policy plan that applies to housing citywide. The policy section of the plan is about 10 pages long. I'm not going to run through it all, but it is available on the website in English, Spanish, and Hmong. These policies are grouped into increasing housing choice and access, social connections and health, walkable neighborhoods and transit-oriented development, and neighborhood development and urban design. Okay, so you might be wondering what exactly is a policy. In planning, a policy is a guiding principle or statement that informs decisions about how land can be used. A policy may also guide future efforts to improve physical, social, and economic conditions of a city. Policies are designed to support the community's overall goals in topics such as housing, economic development, and sustainability. However, plan policies are not regulations. They cannot create or change existing programs, regulations, or funding for specific priorities on their own. For example, a policy might say, allow for accessory dwelling units in all neighborhoods. So then this policy would guide future zoning decisions and development approvals to allow for accessory dwelling units in more neighborhoods. The plan outlines next steps staff would take in implementing changes to the zoning code. I'm going to go over the main recommendations. There's also a full implementation chart in the plan that describes all the possible related updates staff will need to look at when any updates to the zoning code are made. So first, let's look at how to encourage more housing diversity in neighborhoods. We're making 2 parts to this recommendation for middle housing, the types of housing that blend into the most neighborhoods because they're a similar scale. So for the first part, the recommendation is in all residentially zoned areas, allow for single-family detached homes, accessory dwelling units, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, and cottage courts. I'm going to go through these housing types in a bit more detail. So single-family homes are a traditional housing type that we think of in terms of home ownership in Milwaukee. They come in many sizes. A smaller home can be a more affordable option, whereas a larger home can have more room for families, including extended family. Accessory dwelling units. We don't currently define these within our zoning code. Where you see them currently, they're historical use or they went through a special approval process. Accessory dwelling units include the coach style with a unit above a garage, a detached accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, an internal ADU, which would be a converted attic or basement, or an attached ADU onto the primary home. These can work for a lot of different people, upsizing, downsizing, just starting out, and they can provide additional income for homeowners. Townhomes are basically single-family attached homes. They can be owned or rented, and they're often more affordable due to reduced land, utility, and maintenance costs. Duplexes and triplexes, these work for many household types, including first-time homeowners, one-person households, families, extended families, those with aging parents. There's also the potential to support a mortgage with rental income, and they blend right into our existing neighborhoods. The second part of the recommendation to increase housing diversity within neighborhoods is in all residential areas where a duplex or other multi-unit housing was permitted historically, allow fourplexes. So essentially where the code currently allows duplexes or more, allow for the housing types that I just reviewed, plus fourplexes or up to 4 units on a property. The idea with this set of recommendations is to allow just a little bit more density everywhere, allowing for a few more housing types. And from what we've seen in other cities that have implemented these types of zoning updates, it's an incremental approach with changes occurring over time. We already allow for some of these housing types in some neighborhoods, and they aren't getting built in large numbers. There are other factors that play into whether a home or a housing type will get built, such as the cost of building materials and available financing. So how else do we encourage more housing diversity in areas of the city? The second main recommendation is to encourage more housing opportunities in multifamily and commercial zoning districts. Currently, in our downtown and in our commercial and multifamily districts, we have a mathematical equation that says, based on the size of this property, you can have this many housing units within that building. However, that mathematical equation does not explain how tall the building is going to be, or how wide the building is going to be, or where it sits on the lot. And we have those requirements too. So what we're recommending is to rely on the design standards such as height and setback requirements to determine the size of the building and have that control the number of units within the building and remove then the mathematical equation. The idea here is that this change will make it a lot clearer about what can be built, and it sets those design standards for how people interact with the outside of the building and how that building relates to the surrounding environment. So how do we make sure new developments also support walkable neighborhoods? With all this, we really want to make sure we're updating our design standards for multifamily buildings to ensure that we have nice facades, windows that help create a safer walkable environment, creating eyes on the street, composition, a building that fits nicely within the surrounding context. So we don't have a huge building covering a whole block without some ways to break it up. And also making sure the parking structures don't have huge blank walls that would create an environment that isn't nice to walk in. So there's been some confusion throughout the process, and we realized that some of the more engagement tools were needed to talk through what the plan is, what it's not, and just describe the kind of changes in more detail. So this set of bullet points is one of the things we've been working on to explain what the plan does do. And I'll go through a few of the other tools that we've developed and are working on in a minute. So this plan does update the city's comprehensive plan, which is a set of basic guiding documents to help inform future decisions. The plan does acknowledge the fundamental role of zoning in creating historic inequities and segregation. It does provide a citywide framework for equitable growth in the long term without displacement. It does include policies that promote home ownership, affordable rental options in all neighborhoods. It does include recommendations for future zoning reforms that could increase housing options and reduce housing costs while also retaining the character of existing neighborhoods. However, the plan does not modify any existing program or regulation or propose any specific development project. The plan does not influence zoning or land use decisions in place outside of the city of Milwaukee. We only have jurisdiction over the city of Milwaukee, so this does not apply to any other municipalities within Milwaukee County. This does not solve the affordability crisis or directly control market forces that set the new price of new and existing homes. It does not provide a detailed analysis of specific strategies to solve all the pieces of the housing puzzle, that one that was showed to you on an earlier slide, but we do recognize the importance of continuing to work on all those pieces. The plan does not discourage the development of new detached single-family homes, and it does not encourage development of larger multifamily buildings and 1- and 2-family residential neighborhoods. So as I mentioned, there was an initial public hearing asking for more time for engagement. Some of the questions raised through the hearing and the public comments made it clear that additional communication materials were needed. So since then, we've been doing some small scale community engagement, meeting directly with neighborhood groups, and we'll continue to do so. We're also working on scheduling a couple open house style public meetings in December, and I'll share that information in a few minutes. We're holding these webinars to help bring people up to date, and we'll be posting recordings for those that can't make it. We're also working on a benefit and harm analysis. One of the requests that came out of the public hearing in July was to document who would benefit and who would be harmed from these recommendations and changes. These are many factors that we considered and researched during the process to develop the recommendations, and we've been going through and writing that all out. Part of this document also includes information on the data that we'll be tracking to monitor changes in new development and impacts. So if it turns out that any of these changes lead to unintended negative consequences, we can always make more updates. We've also been working on graphic and website updates. So I'm going to jump over to our website now and show you some of the resources we've been working on. So if you go over to engagemilwaukee.gov/growingMKE, this is the main landing page, and you can go to the resources tab, and you'll see some of the new resources that we've put up. So here you can click and you'll go to a current and proposed zoning information map. I preloaded this, so it'll be a little bit easier, hopefully. Thought I did. Anyway, it takes the map a minute to load, but essentially you can zoom in on any property in the city of Milwaukee. And let's just grab a random one and click on it, and it will load a little bit clearer in time. Sorry if this is anybody's home that happens to be on the call, but what will pop up is the address of that location and the zoning district it's in. So then you can go over to this drop-down menu, and under RT4, you see what's currently allowed in the RT4 zoning district and what GrowingMKE recommends allowing. So you can do this for any property that's residentially zoned in the city of Milwaukee. Going back to the resources section, we've also uploaded the graphic of the Milwaukee housing puzzle, an example of what housing diversity looks like on a Milwaukee block, and also uploaded a couple of external videos. This one talks about equity and zoning. And then there's been quite a few questions about assessments and taxes. So we added this video and some other information as well. And then we also added this tab, which goes through Milwaukee zoning and development history throughout time. This is also within the plan, but we wanted to get it online as well. I meant to note that the website does translate into 10 different languages, so any of the text online would translate as well. So going back to the presentation, and we'll continue to add resources to the website along with the benefit and harm analysis as we continue to go through this outreach process. Oh, you know what? Forgot to mention on the resources page, you can also go back to this main page and the proposed plan from July. It's available right here. The full plan is here. The policy sections are in Spanish, English, and Hmong. There's an executive summary, and you can offer comments here as well. Now I'll go back to that point. Up next. So we're working on getting 2 open houses scheduled in December. We like the open house setup because it provides a way to present a lot of information with staff and interactive ways to answer questions. I'm really close to confirming the date to have one at Pulaski High School in the cafeteria, probably second week of December. And then we have confirmed that we'll be able to hold one at the Wisconsin Black Historic Society and Museum on Thursday, December 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. So once I confirm Pulaski, I'll be sending out email messaging and social media as well about both of those. At the Pulaski High School one, we'll have a Spanish translator there and also boards in Spanish, and we'll have packets of the boards in Spanish and Hmong at both of the meetings. If you can't join or you know someone that can't join those dates and is interested, the boards from the open houses will be put up online as well for anyone to view at their own time. So now I am going to stop sharing and we'll enter the question and answer session.
Well, thank you, Amy. We've been watching the chat, and there's a couple questions that we can start with. I'll read them off, and if people want to keep putting questions in the chat, we'll take them as they come. But we'll start with the order they came in. The first one was related to whether the current building code would apply for new accessory dwelling units. The person must be aware that there's been some building code changes in recent years. I'll take this question and I'll do my best to answer it. Historically, under some of the older building codes that were in effect, there was lesser standards for people wanting to have a triplex or a 3 or 4 unit home. In about 2017, there was changes to the state building code that applied additional regulations through the building code, separate from zoning, on any home that has more than 2 units. So anything larger than a duplex has to follow standards of the commercial code. And the question was, would GrowingMKE change that? And the answer is no. We don't have the ability at the local level to change the building code. So anything that would be larger than 2 units would have to follow all of the safety standards associated with our current building code. And we understand that that does add some costs. And I know there's others kind of working on exploring ways to make sure that there's not overly burdensome requirements in the building code. But GrowingMKE on its own would not change those requirements. And anyone who would be proposing to construct a triplex or anything larger than a 2-unit building would have to follow the current building code. There was another question about, does the plan address K-12 education? You want to take that one?
So currently you might be familiar with that MPS is working on a long range plan. The consultant recently presented that. So the plan does not directly discuss K-12 education, except for the fact that we do know that we have a declining student population, especially based on MPS's records and birth rates. So it is something that we have in the plan as a policy item to consider transitioning schools that are no longer needed for use to housing opportunities as well. But otherwise, the plan is focused on housing in neighborhoods, not directly on education.
Thank you. The next question was about the permitting process, separate from zoning. Does the GrowingMKE recommend changes to the permitting process? And I can touch on that briefly. The plan does identify, from discussions we've had with small developers, the possibility for some tweaks to the permitting process. And anyone who is in the development industry and would like to talk about that offline, we're always interested in people's feedback. But big picture, the items in the GrowingMKE plan that we recommend are just some minor tweaks to things like our process for making minor modifications to detailed plan developments. That's an area where we've acknowledged some potential improvements that might remove barriers for housing choice, as well as continuing to establish additional zoning section within our Department of Neighborhood Service Plan Review that should, again, we think has the potential over the long term to streamline the permitting process for projects that meet all of the requirements of the code. Another question was whether changes to the zoning code would impact the requirements that apply to new construction or rehabilitation within our historic districts. Tanya, do you want to answer that one?
Sure, yes. Great question. All of the guidelines for the local historic districts would continue to work in symbiosis with the zoning code. So those guidelines do still rely on the zoning code, but by all means, any new builds in local districts do need to be reviewed by Historic Preservation Commission and follow through with the guidelines of those individual districts.
There was a question in the chat asking for a little bit more information about the harm and benefit analysis. Could you talk about what that might look like and who's preparing it?
So staff are working on the benefit and harm analysis. It's a document that goes through what exists currently in our code, what the benefits and harms might be of keeping things as they are, what the various pieces are, but it talks about some of the questions about historic districts, displacement, some of the questions that we've been getting, and how we're going to look at tracking each of those measures to address any of those potential unintended consequences, and kind of showing also what we've seen in terms of best practices nationwide. So that benefit and harm analysis will be made public when it's complete, and we welcome feedback on that as well. Anything else to add, Sam or Tanya, feel free.
No, yeah, thank you. I think it's an important piece. I know a few people have asked for some of that analysis to be centralized in one document. And so that's what we're working to prepare. It would include a summary of some of the questions that we've heard throughout this process, especially around concerns that some of the changes may have unintended negative consequences. And then we will prepare some analysis analyzing that, as well as then talk about the complementary strategies that the city may employ to mitigate those potential harms. And obviously that'll be a piece of the project that we're all interested in feedback on. And when it's prepared, we will, we'll share a draft on the public website and solicit feedback. And that will be obviously part of the information that our Common Council will review when reviewing the plan. Next question was the proposed zoning, or a question about minimum lot sizes. Are there changes proposed in GrowingMKE for minimum lot sizes?
So I mentioned there's an implementation chart included in the GrowingMKE plan that does discuss looking at lot sizes for all of our districts as we move forward with actually updating the zoning code. So we'll be doing something called like test fits to make sure that these recommendations that we're putting forward can actually happen, and adjusting at that point. And that second phase of working on any updates to the zoning code will include needing it to be adopted through a public hearing process and outreach, and we'll be getting all that information online. So yes, looking at minimum lot sizes will be part of the next phase and is within the implementation chart in the plan.
There was a question about how the Growing MKE plan aligns with the mayor's desire to grow the populations of Milwaukee. Obviously, Mayor Johnson has talked about long-term his goals to grow our city's population. I think in the current frame, though, our plan is focused on ensuring that our zoning code aligns with strategies that will help increase housing choice for current Milwaukeeans, as well as people who are going to be, interested in living here in the short term. We know that we know that there's a shortage of housing units currently. We know that that shortage is adding to pressure for displacement. And we want to make sure that we're providing that our zoning code is aligned to provide a wide range of housing options for current residents and people who are going to, over time, choose to move here. We know that if we're not providing those choices, it will increase displacement pressures on existing residents. And so we want to make sure that we're aligning our zoning code with all the other strategies that we're working with our partners to deploy, which include strategies to build new starter homes for low and moderate income home buyers, help existing residents retain their homes through home ownership and home repair programs, and also construct affordable housing that'll be affordable to some of our lowest income residents who have the most trouble accessing homes in the private market, and who we know we need to continue to focus on our efforts to create and subsidize and use city resources to provide housing options across the income spectrum. All that are part of the overall goals that are driving the Growing MKE plan, ensuring that we continue to make sure that we achieve the overall goals of our housing, collective affordable housing plan, which is that every Milwaukeean have a safe and accessible home. So this is one piece of that puzzle, and it also allows and supports a lot of those strategies. We heard there was a question about, are there any tweaks to parking requirements with new construction or remodels? Tanya, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion about parking, and certainly that will need to be reviewed carefully as we are working on zoning code and evolving it. But we don't have, proposed changes to parking requirements right now, because we know that that will require further study. And we have really strong parking regulations as is, but we do want to take the time to look at that when we have a chance.
Question, how does the plan encourage and support owner occupancy? Especially in, I guess, multi-unit buildings.
Yeah, I mean, certainly during the engagement early on and throughout the process, we've heard a lot from Milwaukeeans that we want more home ownership opportunities of all housing types and price points. And so right now there aren't a lot of new condominiums or co-ops or co-housing units being built affordably to a lot of Milwaukeeans, but we would like to see that. So when we're trying to encourage more housing in the city and more housing types, that's for home ownership and for rental. And we're hoping that the condo market and other alternative home ownership structures like community land trusts and limited equity co-ops and other great tools in our toolbox could be utilized more in the community. And there have been some positive signs recently of some condominiums and co-housing developments in the city. So hopefully that's a positive sign that there could be more to come.
A question, is there a plan to enhance transportation modes as the city becomes more dense, including rail options?
Yeah, that is a great question too. Sewer PAC and the county and the city are all working closely together to find opportunities for this. The city is actually going to be working on a transportation and mobility plan in the next couple years to think about that as well. But right now, I think the priority is really maintaining the services that we have. MCTS, or Milwaukee County Transit system, has done some planning that hopefully can eventually be implemented, but right now there isn't a formal plan in that way. There are also plans by the city to extend the streetcar eventually, and there is ongoing conversation about that as well.
One of the other questions was about what the plan does to support the redevelopment of underutilized properties, including vacant and dilapidated apartment buildings. And Brian, on that, there's a few things that within the plan that I believe align with that. One is, again, as Tanya shared in the introduction, a good thing that Milwaukee already does that some of our peers don't do is allow a wider mix of existing buildings to be converted for residential. There are many cities where you can't convert or you can't have residential uses on commercial districts. We already do allow that. So our code does support the reuse of vacant, commercial buildings for housing. There are a few things within GrowingMKE that we think will support that overall goal. One is to, especially along our business and transit corridors, allow for a wider mix of housing types within those buildings. By Tanya, we talked about removing some of the lot area per dwelling unit restrictions that we know have posed a barrier to conversions in certain cases where people have run into barriers caused by that aspect of the code. We also will continue to deploy the city resources that many of you are familiar with that we use to support the rehabilitation of vacant properties. Those include our suite of programs that we use to help existing homeowners maintain their homes, whether that's the Strong Homes Loan Program, the Code Compliance Loan Program, or others, as well as our the programs that we operate to help small and emerging developers and entrepreneurs make investments into existing kind of Main Street style buildings, which I'm guessing is part of your question. So yeah, we do certainly support that goal and continue to make tweaks to advance those items. The next question was, kind of some of these are repeated. There was a question about density per acre restrictions. Tanya, could you talk a little bit more about that? The question was to explain again the recommendations in the plan related to the lot area per dwelling unit within our commercial corridors.
Sure, yeah. So we are proposing to streamline those calculations in our commercial corridors. What's happening right now is we have regulations in terms of setbacks, height, and then we have an added calculation that is the lot area per dwelling unit. And what we are proposing is to remove the overly complex calculation around lot area per dwelling unit and rely instead on the height and the setbacks. And the number of units can kind of then be determined based on Milwaukee community needs by the developer that's developing that project.
There's a question about condos. Why are condos not part of the plan outside of the downtown? I'm not sure exactly what was meant there, but the answer to that is the city does both currently and through GrowingMKE support homeownership opportunities everywhere in the city. So there's certainly nothing about city regulations or city plans that would suggest that condos should only be developed downtown. The plan and our current regulations support that as a housing choice throughout the city. There's a question around our financial programs. Will the city allocate financial resources to condo development as opposed to apartment development? Right now, the city policies related to utilizing city resources for housing limit our, we only use city resources to support affordable housing. And that's been a commitment of the past mayor, current mayor, to really focus on utilizing our city resources to support our deepest housing needs, which are around affordable housing. And so our current policies are aligned towards that. And I know that we are continuing to look at tweaks to those policies to make sure that we're responding to market need and market demand and tailoring those resources to where that need is greatest, both for affordable housing as well as workforce housing. And so I know that our department continues to work on that. GrowingMKE doesn't make any specific recommendations tied to the specific design of those financial incentive programs, other than to say that we continue to recommend that we tailor them to support those overall goals, which include affordable housing and homeownership. So I think that we agree with the intent of your question, is that we want to continue to make sure that we're supporting both homeownership and affordable rental development, and that's been consistent with our past practice. There's another question about historic districts. I think we maybe answered this already, but maybe just this one maybe slightly wordedly different, which is, does the current plan change any of the established requirements for historic districts, whether they are city or state requirements.
No, it does not. The, any property that is designated as a local, historic, property or district would still be, you know, regulated by the guidelines of that local historic district and, still need to go before the Historic Preservation Commission for certificates of appropriateness. And that would be, external, changes to existing properties and then all new properties within those districts.
There's two questions about taxes and tax burden and how taxes get distributed. I think the general answer to both those questions is, if I'm reading them correctly, it's when will residents kind of see any benefit from new development? And the short answer to that is it depends a little bit on how much new housing gets developed. One thing that we, right now, the city's main source of revenue is the property tax, and our ability to increase the amount of revenue for existing services often comes from the property tax and new development. And so as the tax base grows, that is one of the tools we have to alleviate the tax burden on current residents. Every time a new development comes online, it spreads out the existing tax burden to pay for those existing services. It's something that happens very slowly and very gradually, but we also know that we've heard throughout the city at almost every public meeting on every topic, not just about housing, but town halls and everything else. People are concerned with growing tax burdens across the city, and the only tools the city has to alleviate those tax burdens are either to cut or reduce services or build the tax base. And new housing development certainly helps build that tax base. There was another question about will increased density, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read this on the fly. Will increased density help provide additional amenities in neighborhoods that are maybe food deserts or otherwise don't have accessible life-sustaining resources or amenities within them? How do we know that that will increasing housing will influence that?
So in general, a business needs a lot of people to survive, to be self-sustaining. So grocery stores look for where there is a certain amount of density of residents and things like that. Yes, we do have issues with food deserts and neighborhoods and things, but by increasing density, some of our neighborhoods that have the most businesses and people and walkable environments have the greatest density and mix of housing. So it's kind of a chicken or an egg. You have to have the people, they have the businesses to come, and you want the businesses to have the people that are there now. So the idea is that they work together and they're economically supporting each other. When you have people, you have the people to support those businesses as well. And to get to the other pieces of the puzzle, we need to continue to support ways to bring businesses within communities, even where there isn't a lot of development as well.
There was another questions about condo development in the code, and someone indicating they thought it was illegal or that the code doesn't allow condos outside of the downtown. I think we tried to clarify that earlier, that right now, no, the zoning code doesn't regulate condominiums differently than other forms of home ownership. And so anywhere that you can build a home, you can build a condominium. I think perhaps what that person's referring to is there are some parts of the city where you are limited to having one house on a standalone parcel. So you couldn't do a small condominium townhome development, for example. And GrowingMKE does make recommendations that would allow those very small condo developments allowed in a larger part of the city, a 2-unit, a 3-unit, a 4-unit development. There's a question about does increasing population lead to increasing need for services? I think that's tied to some of the tax questions earlier. The answer to that is, yeah, of course, it is true that as you add population, there are also increased services that come with that, but it's also not a one-to-one relationship. So for example, in a built-out city like Milwaukee, as you add population, you might see increasing need for some services, but there are some fixed costs, things like our road network that's already built, our park system that's already built, that was built for a much larger population. And as we have lost that population, you're seeing, again, an increasing number of existing residents shoulder the burden for those systems that were built for a larger city. And so there will be some release and relief through on the tax burden through new development. And that's something that we've seen throughout our recent history as well, is that the development that we've seen happen over the past few years has certainly helped. It doesn't have the same new infrastructure associated with it, given that the city already has much of the infrastructure to serve it when it's developed in already built out areas. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a question. I'm trying. How many units would in-demand areas need to absorb in order to reach the overall goals of this plan? I can answer that one. I know that's come up at past public meetings. The plan doesn't set an explicit goal for housing development by number. We know that from looking at other cities who've implemented changes to the zoning codes, any change, new development will be gradual. It will happen over time. It will respond to a variety of, just like under the current zoning code, there's parts of the city that allow duplexes or triplexes where you still have single family and duplex neighborhoods. And so the goal is not to set numeric goals and say each neighborhood has to have this much development, but instead to make sure that our zoning code aligns with the overall goals for housing growth and choice. And so we do anticipate that any results that you'd see from these zoning code changes would happen very gradually. They'd respond to market demand, and it would also depend on a lot of other factors, including overall population goals and larger economic goals, including, there was questions earlier about what about attracting jobs to the city. We certainly recognize that in the big picture, the overall trends in Milwaukee's population are going to be driven by many things that are not just tied to the zoning code. They're going to be driven by things like whether or not we are able to achieve some of our goals for job growth. Obviously, we know that those are the factors that people consider when choosing where to live. And we want to make sure, and the mayor has made very clear his vision is to make sure that Milwaukee is a place that people choose to live. And they choose to live here because of access to jobs that are family sustaining, choose to live here because of safe streets, high quality education, high quality infrastructure. And the city is obviously focused on achieving all those things because we want to be a city that allows our existing residents to have access to all those amenities. And so obviously how we do on those goals will drive the demand for housing and where people choose to live. And that's kind of how the city has developed over time and how it will continue to develop in the future. And most of all, there was another question about, the impacts on existing residents. And at the end of the day, that is what's driving a lot of our work at the city, both in our department and other departments, which is what are we doing to make sure that Milwaukee is providing a really high quality place high quality of life for our existing residents. That's what drives all of our overall goals. Of course, we talk about growth and the benefits growth can bring, but that's secondary to ensuring that existing residents are able to access safe and decent housing, that we're able to access amenities in existing neighborhoods. That's one of the things we've heard loudly throughout the process of doing engagement on GrowingMKE is people have talked about a desire to have walkable neighborhood amenities, things like walk to work, being able to walk to worship, walk to parks, walk to shopping destinations. And we know that one of the ways to help achieve those goals is to have walkable urban neighborhoods where people can live and work and shop and do all those things in close proximity. And we know that the shape of our cities is driven in some ways by the zoning code. And so we want to make sure that we're continuing to support housing development in areas that can provide access to those amenities. And then separate from our work on housing here, just because it's come up in a lot of the questions, our department is the Department of City Development. And so we're also working on attracting jobs to the city. We have land use and job creation strategies that attempt to ensure that as we're attracting jobs across a wide range of industries that provide opportunities for people with, a wide variety of educational attainments and that pay family supporting wages. And we have a set of strategies that we're employing to do that. The mayor has obviously made some very strong commitments to making sure our streets are safer through policies to reduce and eliminate serious injuries and deaths on our streets. And we know that all of those things are what go into making the city great. And this is one piece of that puzzle. But it's obviously something that we're working on in conjunction with our peers in other city departments who are working on all of those elements that we know are necessary to address some of the things that we've heard from residents that they want to see in their neighborhoods. Like, and that includes, yeah, environmental cleanup. Obviously we understand that there continues to be parts of the city that have legacies of former industrial use. And yeah, we have a whole suite of programs that we're using to go after federal resources to clean up brownfields. For the person that asked that question, happy to, if you email our the GrowingMKE address, happy to get you more information about that specifically. There's questions
Sam,
about.
to answer Sharon's question about policies and plans in place to make sure redevelopment of former industrial sites, there is a policy, it's on page 39, Sharon, if you want to look it up, that talks about making sure that any converted industrial buildings are indeed should no longer be used for an industrial use, but making sure that there aren't potential health risks. And Common Council also put through a resolution to make sure any conversions of industrial buildings take into proper precautions to make sure that they are safe.
There was 2 questions about some of the concerns that came up during the engagement process. I think that some of the things that we've heard throughout the process, a lot of them were raised on this Q&A already. And I think that some of the things that we specifically heard were questions about how to ensure that as new development, or what can the city do to promote and encourage that as new development is brought online or comes to the city, that it doesn't come at the expense of displacing existing residents. And the city has an anti-displacement plan that we have, and we every year update our anti-displacement indicators. And we know that that's an area where there's some significant desire among community members, nonprofits, to really continue to bolster our anti-displacement planning. You know, we did create an anti-displacement plan in 2018. We've implemented a lot of those recommendations. We want to continue to implement some of the others that were recommended but still remain in the design stage. And we also want to continue to work with our community partners. There's a process going on currently that's being led by the Community Development Alliance to develop a homeowners and future homeowners Bill of Rights, which is an enhanced anti-displacement strategy. And we certainly look forward to being a core part of both developing and then implementing those strategies. So that was one of the main concerns. And then another area that we've heard concerns around is certainly we often talk about Milwaukee having a significant disparity in homeownership, a racial disparity in homeownership between white households and households of color. And there's a desire to make sure that we're continuing to reduce that gap and support homeownership, and especially homeownership for first generation or lower and moderate income homeowners, and making sure that the strategies that we might deploy won't come at the expense of those goals as well. And so some of those are the things that we will be analyzing as we develop the benefit and harm analysis, as well as suggesting mitigation strategies. Another question about the anti-displacement plan, or sorry, there's the anti-displacement plan was developed in 2018. It recommended a suite of strategies. There's a question about how much funding specifically has been deployed. There was a number of strategies that came out of the anti-displacement plan that the city has been implementing. That includes a commitment to use tax increment financing to support new development of affordable housing in areas at risk of displacement. I don't have the latest numbers, but there's been millions of dollars invested through the tax increment financing program into creating, I believe now, these are going to be rough numbers. I don't have the summary in front of me, but over 1,000 units of new housing in areas that were at risk of displacement, with more than 200 of those set aside for existing neighborhood residents. So that represents millions of dollars of investment. There's also been millions of dollars of investment through our Strong Homes loan program and code compliance loan program to help existing residents maintain and improve their homes. And the Greater Milwaukee Committee, which is a nonprofit entity, worked closely through its MKE United effort to create a specific anti-displacement fund that operates in 2 neighborhoods that data suggested had the highest potential for displacement of existing homeowners, and that deployed that's deployed. I don't have the exact numbers, but a couple $100,000 so far to help existing homeowners in those neighborhoods with tax payments to basically freeze their taxes at the level they were in 2018. And they're that program is committed to go on for a number of other years, but that's not a city program, and so I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. There's a question about those numbers. Yes, I will share in the chat in a minute. There's a summary that the Department of City Development had prepared for the Common Council this summer on implementation of the anti-displacement plan, and we can share that out for sure. Okay, it's 1:04, and I think we've hit most of the questions. I think we'll stick on for a few minutes, but Amy, Tanya, do you want to kind of give some closing comments? And one of the questions earlier was about where people will be able to access these materials afterwards.
Yeah, so we have one more webinar tomorrow evening in which we'll have a Spanish and Hmong translation as well. So we'll be posting the videos with the English, Spanish, and Hmong as early next week, if not sooner. And we'll also be posting the slides from the slide deck. So those information will be online. I will send out an e-notify, and if you're on the email list, you'll get an email as well from that when the information is posted. And with that, I should also, I hope, have that Pulaski open house date confirmed, and we'll be able to send that and the other open house date as well. So yeah, those are the next steps. So as long as you're on the email list or on the e-notify, you will get notified when that stuff is posted. If not, look early next week, and that information should be online as well. So thank you all for being here. And if you know anybody that was interested in this project and might be interested in attending the webinar tomorrow evening, please let them know. It'll be the same presentation. And then the recordings will be online too for anybody that missed it. And if there are any questions we missed, feel free to put them in the chat. And as Sam said, we'll hang around for a little while. Elizabeth will put the recording on the website by early next week. Sandra, you're sending something to me as a direct message. I'm not clear if you want that to be a direct message or not.
Which one?
It's a direct message sent to me, so I'm unclear
Oh.
if they're looking for it to be answered publicly or not, but it's.
Yes, I asked you the question, who were the people involved in the planning? Who were the residents? Who were the developers? And what areas of the city did they cover? That's my question.
So there were 19 residents on our community advisory committee, but it wasn't just limited to their residential environment. We also, and it was spread throughout aldermanic districts in different areas of the city, very diverse group as well. And then we also had focus groups in some of the areas of the city that typically aren't as engaged online. And then a variety of developers in different platforms from small scale with some of the Acre graduates, as well as some of the larger developers as well. Getting a full, it's been a variety of meetings throughout as people kind of asked us to update them. And then in terms of internally, we've had representatives from our planning group along with Department of Neighborhood Services, the Eco Office, the Health Department. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Well,
No,
I would
not exactly. I would like to know who from the east side might have been involved, because we can't find anyone who's ever had any contact, and also who represented DNS, please.
Okay, some of the staff changes have happened at DNS during the process. India is now part of BOZA, but she was part of the process along with now the people that are higher ups in DNS, their predecessors, so they'll be involved going forward. But those staff changes happened throughout the process. And then the other question was the resident that we had on the east side actually did move partway through the process. And so we did work on engaging the east side in other ways as well.
I think it's important that you have a representative from every single district of the city. And I think that's not happened, and that's been a really big concern with the multiple neighborhoods in the city on the east side. And we had a meeting of at least 5 neighborhood districts, none of which felt they were represented.
Yeah, I understand. The person that we had was a recommendation of the late alderman. So he was currently an East Side resident at that time and has since moved out of the district. So we did reach out to different alders for people within their aldermanic district. I had a list of 26 and then 19 people took me up on the offer. So we tried to reach people in a variety of ways, but we're really trying to get a diverse group. So I'm glad that the East Side neighborhoods did ask us to have that meeting and are getting engaged now as well, because we do want to hear your input. So being a member of the Community Advisory Committee, they were kind of a test point, for helping us communicate ideas and things like that, but they weren't meant to be the decision makers. They were just meant to help us get the word out, but also just kind of talk to us and make sure that we were ground truthing the way we were communicating some of these ideas. Because as planners, we could use a lot of acronyms.
Absolutely. And
So is there any way to get someone from any of these districts as a representative going forward?
The Community Advisory Committee is not planned to meet anymore. And so in terms of representative, we're asking for people to be involved through this process going forward, like attending today. And Sandra, I'm happy to follow up and talk more about any concerns the East Side has, but
Okay.
we're still doing engagement by all means.
Okay.
We've done hundreds of events throughout the city at libraries and the public open houses and when neighborhood groups have invited us. So we have gotten a lot of engagement with East Side residents. And as Amy mentioned, the Community Advisory Committee was really there to, make sure that our communication was accessible to the community and was meaningful and that, our engagement plan overall was on track, given that it is a citywide plan. And so we had to be very creative and collaborative about how we did engagement, given that, we did want to engage equitably across the city.
Thank you. With all due respect, I think that message wasn't always sent out to us via our late alderperson, but going forward, we appreciate anything. Thank you.
And just transparency. Transparency is key because a lot of the residents are saying that some of the things that are going towards the proposal may not work. But again, it's just like everybody's not going to be pleased in this process. And we just got to remember we're doing the best for Milwaukee that we can.
Yeah, no, thank you. We want to continue to try to clarify things and answer questions. I know I've been in touch with some folks from Amani to try to do a neighborhood meeting as well there. So again, we're going to continue doing these meetings. And if you can make it to the open house, it's a great way to also start learning more about the project or encourage people that way. But we will continue to answer questions. Housing is complex, so there's a lot of things that come up. And so bear with us, but we're still doing engagement and hope to continue answering any questions people have and getting feedback.
And we're going to be doing the sleep out right next to 912 West Center. So we're doing a sleep out to bring awareness to homeless youth, one of the other projects. And so it's going to be Amani United, Dominican Center, Mission of Christ. If you want to bring any of your materials, we will have a little resource table on that Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, but we'll be sleeping out from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if anyone does want to bring any of their resource materials and have them out on the table, they'll be able to bring them that Friday after 3 or Saturday morning by 10. And we'll be sleeping out for the whole entire days. And this is Crystal. Elizabeth had to step off the call.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that this weekend?
Yes, it is. And it's also through Covenant House. So Covenant House does the sleep out for homeless youth all throughout the country. And so for us, what we end up doing is bringing more awareness for not only our homeless youth in Milwaukee, but sending them to different locations like Pathfinders, some of our other partners as well. So we just want to make sure that, and then if families come along and they say that they're going through different housing instabilities, to be able to give them the different resources within our neighborhoods. So that way, if you come over and you're from the South Side, we have something for you from the South Side. If you come over and you're the East Side, we have something for you. It's not just based off Amani or Lindsay Heights. It's to make sure that we have that collaborative, that we all work together, and that that information is shared collectively.
Thank you. Miriam? Or
Hi,
Elizabeth?
can you hear me all?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, I just typed something in the chat, but I also wanted to know because actually the most thorough explanation of the plan we've gotten as we joined Metcalf Park during their study sessions. I think that was really helpful for us. However, it was in English, so we were reiterating that having that full in-depth conversation with our neighbors, as people perhaps have heard it generally. Some people have gone to the library, but you know they stop in and out, as well as social media. Yes, there's engagement, but we know and understand that some people can't properly digest or even comprehend fully what that actually means without, you know, guidance the way that Metcalf did. So we really appreciate everyone working hard to just get us to understand this plan better. It sounds wonderful and great, but we do definitely need that in-depth explanation. So thank you all for having this meeting. And once again, we would like to see that engagement in our Muskego Way neighborhood.
But yeah, Miriam or Elizabeth, I don't know which, are you going by Miriam now? But let's continue to connect. I know we
Yes,
had an
that is
email
my name.
exchange a few weeks ago, but let's reconnect. Dan? Dan, do you have a question? Go ahead and unmute.
Sorry, I had to get back to the unmute button. I've said it a couple times in the chat, and maybe this is a procedural issue down the line, but if a particular part of the city through a neighborhood association requests to not have density increased in their neighborhood, would that be honored? Could they be at request to be removed from any changes to the neighborhood?
Our zoning isn't set up. Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say our zoning isn't set up by neighborhood boundaries, and so this is a citywide project. We're continuing to seek input about the concerns that neighborhoods have, though, on that level. But the recommendations are based on the zoning districts.
So adding auxiliary units in the back of properties, for instance, converting garages into living units, a neighborhood can't say, we really don't want that in our area through a formal process through their neighborhood associations? Do you think people would feel this is just being imposed on them if you're removing their voice?
So as Amy mentioned, the current proposal would be to change the rules of the zoning districts citywide. And so we would look at each zoning district and propose updates, like for things like accessory dwelling units. The current proposal would be to have those be something that would be allowed citywide. But again, I mean, we ultimately those decisions will be decisions of the Common Council. And so we're, both we and the Common Council continue to be interested in feedback, though on the accessory dwelling units specifically, that's one thing that I think we've heard the most general consensus around support from citywide, that's a housing option that a lot of people feel is an appropriate thing within a city like Milwaukee, and we already have a lot of those uses in many neighborhoods. So yeah, we're continue to be interested in people's feedback, but the current proposal would be to do it through changes to the rules within all residential zoning districts citywide.
That's interesting.
Any more questions? With that, thank you all, and yeah, stay tuned. Please sign up for the email list if you aren't already, so you can get updates Someone else posted in the e-notify, and I also put the direct link for the Growing MK email list as well. And thank you all for being here and joining us today.